Hey, welcome to the channel. We hope that you enjoy today's stories and check out the chapters on the video to see all the stories for today. But before we get into this video, subscribe to the channel and hit that bell icon to get notified when we release a new video. So let's get into the video.
Friends of killers, what were your first thoughts after finding out, and did you think they seemed off before?
I knew something had happened, way quieter than he usually was. He kept zoning out or staring into space. For context, it was an accident, but he was scared and covered it up, not very well though because the cops found the body. He was suspiciously invested in the case. I was actually with him watching TV when the news announced they had found the body. He started sobbing and I was like, "Dude, did you know her?"
No, it's just really sad that the family lost their grandma.
I chalked it up to him losing his own grandma a month or two prior. It didn't even occur to me that it happened like 2 miles from his house. He was doing a bad job at work and kept getting distracted. When the police showed up at our work, they came over to him and said they had some questions to ask him, and they didn't even get another word out before he collapsed, started bawling and spilt everything out that happened. He confessed everything right there on the shop floor. It would later come out that he'd written a 2-part apology letter and put it in a Ziploc bag and gone back to leave it with the body. They asked the front office for a document with his handwriting on it, and it was a perfect match. There was damage to the front of his pickup along with DNA in the bumper. The family understood it was an accident and did feel sorry for him. He got off with a couple of years in prison, of which he only served half. When he got out, the first thing he did was have his pickup destroyed at a junkyard. He said he couldn't bear to look at anything from that night. Sadly, this would bear true as he committed self-deletion not too long after. The family had forgiven him and was actually one of the last people he called before taking his own life. He wasn't a bad guy, it was just an accident.
Similar story in my life. My friend ended her brother and partner in a car accident due to negligence. She had to drive from the south of the United Kingdom to the north to pick them up for an event, and she decided she was fine to drive back the same day. It was a long drive and late, her passengers were asleep. She also fell asleep at the wheel about half an hour before the end of her journey. When the police arrived, she was screaming,
"What have I done?"
over and over, and fully admitted to the accident. They gave her a suspended sentence to deal with the trauma. When we met, she had hair missing all along the side of her head, which grew back thin because of the stress. And she was very open to anyone that would ask her about it. But she was riddled with guilt and self-hatred and would hurt herself. One Christmas she came with us to our work's party. Went home that night and ended herself. She had written us a letter and left a voicemail. The local paper wrote the story in a way that made it look like she did it just to escape jail time or consequences, when in actuality she was far more haunted and heartbroken by what she did than anyone could have known. There are a few articles around, and some of them are much kinder. But the local one made her out to be a monster or something. And I can't really bring myself to look at them because they have her picture, and I miss her. So yeah, screw you, the Herald, and rest in peace, my friend.
Not my friend, but my older sister's closest friend through childhood and high school, so she was like a second sister to me. Both developed major substance problems starting in their mid-teens. My sister eventually decided she couldn't have her in her life anymore for the sake of her recovery. Years go by and she suddenly gets arrested for ending an old lady she was shoveling snow for. Apparently, the woman confronted her about having stolen her credit card and she beat her to death. There was never anything off about her. Just a normal teenage girl. Honor student, a multiple sport athlete, well liked, and unlike my sister, never got in trouble at school.
He wasn't a friend of mine, but I hung out a few times with Robert Long, who set fire to Palace Backpackers in Childers, Queensland, Australia, when we both stayed or worked out there. 15 people died in the fire he set. I moved on in my travels 2 days before he set the place on fire. My first thoughts were obviously holy freaking ish. Then you fear for the people you knew and had made friends with, scared for their safety. Then reality hits and you realize how close you yourself were to possible death. Then disbelief hits, as names of those murdered start being released and you realize you knew many of them and had worked alongside them. Then it gets personal. You follow the news nightly as he goes on the run. You will the police to find him. You hope they end the son of a B-word as he attempts to flee. And when they finally catch him and throw him in jail for the rest of his life, you say, "Good, I hope you rot in there." And then you forget about it all because you were lucky and neither you nor any of your friends died. And then, years later, when you have kids of your own, it all comes back to you occasionally. Like when your kid starts talking about traveling one day and staying in backpacker hostels.
Went to school with an idiot we'll call Jeff. Wasn't a murderer, but was always creepy AF. He would also always say and do dumb stuff to get a ruse out of people. I wouldn't really say he was a friend, but being both kind of loser kids, we hung around the same circles. One day, he said,
"Haha, I got a lady locked in my basement, ha."
It being Jeff, everyone just shrugged it off or called him an idiot, thinking he was just being an idiot. 1 year later, a news story break. Turns out he and his uncle had a lady living at their house against her will. No crap.
The dude I played basketball with ended up his friend outside his apartment complex. They apparently were chilling together, got into an argument and went outside to fight. He pulled a knife and ended the fight. I was surprised. He was a quiet dude, not super aggressive as a player, just a quiet dude. I can only assume hard substances were involved. Obviously don't need to say this, but a reminder that one decision in the heat of the moment can ruin your life forever.
I was in a state-run psych ward while awaiting trial. I befriended a schizophrenic guy and we hung out daily. When he wasn't responding to the voices in his head, usually by cracking up laughing until teary-eyed, he was smart, charismatic, friendly, and pretty funny. Long story short, he got a weekend pass to spend the weekend with his family and murdered them all with a hammer. He also murdered the Chinese exchange student staying with them. While serving time, I had 2 different Chellies in for murder. One was only 21, very intelligent and was a very kind, generous and nice guy. He was a PCP dealer and started getting high on his own supply. After a week of smoking PCP, during a hallucination, he saw the world on fire and thought he was in hell. He ran home and kicked open his front door. His dad, also his best friend, was sitting in his lazy boy in his living room. My cellie thought it was the devil sitting on a throne, so he emptied his entire clip into his dad's chest at point-blank range. He had no idea what he did until the drugs wore off. His big bro caught a charge so he wouldn't serve his time alone. My cellie was 21 and was sentenced to 60 years, this was in Maryland. He was my close friend by the time I was released. I think of him often, but he asked everyone not to write or visit. The guilt was eating him alive and he wanted to remove himself from people's consciousness. A tragic story for sure. Another cellie served 18 years on a murder, got out, and within 2 weeks, was back in for murder and armed robbery. He was trying to go straight, but he linked back up with the old homies. One of them robbed a check cashing place and ended up ending the store clerk in a shootout. My cellie never even left the car and had no idea what his boy was about to do. Both were charged with murder, and with his record, my cellie, and being on parole, he was given life. He was a wise and friendly man inside. He looked out for us youngsters and tried to use himself as an example of bad choices. Much love to him, as well as the family of the man that was ended. I've had an interesting life.
My friend's older brother was a loose cannon, huge understatement. I'd heard how much abuse his mom and younger brother, my friend, and himself were given frequently by his mom's partner. She was vulnerable mentally and physically handicapped. One day his brother and mom were beaten by the said partner and he snapped. To this day I don't feel like he is a bad person for what he has done, just a young man who was failed by everything that was supposed to protect him and who felt it necessary to protect his mom and brother. I was sad for my friend because his brother was the only constant he really had, and now he's in prison.
I went to school with a girl who ended someone in a car accident. She ran a red light and was drunk. A couple of years later, she gets out of jail and gets in a high-speed chase and derails off the interstate and crashes into a dealership, ending someone in her vehicle. I think the other passengers also passed or were seriously injured. She, on the other hand, was fine. She was always a troubled kid back in school. I recently remembered her after rewatching my Quinceañera video and seeing her in it.
I started work on a construction site and found out the first week I was there that the wife of the foreman was recently found dead. They ruled it a self-deletion. They couldn't find her for a few days, so they asked him if there were any places that they would go together, and he mentioned they would go up into the hills shooting sometimes. They found her in a chest freezer with the door closed. Then I found out she was his second wife. His first wife died from a fall when they were hiking. Everybody is pretty well convinced that he murdered both of them. No proof, no conviction. Definitely watched my back around him at work though. Although I think pretty much everyone in the world was safe except for the women he was seeing. He was showing me girls he was going on dates with on his Match.com profile a week after his wife was found.
I was just wondering how many psychos are on dating apps. I've never used dating sites before, but I think it would be pretty neat to send out notifications to everyone on the sites, letting them see profile pics of certain people to avoid and providing a detailed description of what's wrong with them and what they've done. It'll possibly save a ton of heartbreaks and time wasted on psychos. If they try to change their names, an image scan of those people will notify others if it's still the same person.
If you're enjoying today's video about stories of our lives, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel to see more videos like this and more. Now, let's get back to the video.
I've only ever known one person that turned out to have been a killer. In 1980, my brother and I joined a Dungeons & Dragons campaign that we heard about from a bulletin posted at our local bookstore. We didn't know the guy from Adam, but we went to play. We were the only two people who did. In those days, it wasn't a big deal for two teenage boys to go to a stranger's house. The dungeon master was a guy named Lane. He was nice enough, but he had this subdued anger inside him that you could sort of sense. He seemed to have contempt for everyone and everything. He was always harumphing everything, and he had an annoying habit of calling everyone a putsover and over again. My brother and I only played 2 or 3 sessions with him. I can't remember why. Most likely it was because our parents got tired of driving us and picking us up, but I don't remember. One day in the mid-90s, my mom was reading the newspaper and noticed the name of our former dungeon master. His name was kind of hard to forget. My mom said,
"Hey, wasn't this that guy you played D&D with?"
I looked and sure enough, it was him. He had been arrested for ending his girlfriend, her aunt who lived with them, and a next-door neighbor he disliked. He also wounded a police officer in the standoff. He had taken 70 doses of tranquilizers, got drunk along with that, put on camel clothes, grabbed a bunch of assault weapons, and gone on his rage-induced ending spree. He was executed by lethal injection in 1998.
A former coworker ended his mom over a decade since I last saw him. The guy always seemed a little off, not just socially, but he had a ton of nervous tics, like his hands and face was constantly twitching. I just assumed it was Tourette's or something he was trying to control, and it might have been. But when reading articles about his trial, I learned a lot more about him. We were pages at a studio shortly after college, that is, Kenneth from 30 Rock, and it turns out he had battled with schizophrenia while in college. Apparently, he would write letters to celebrities as if he knew them. He had a lot of treatment and a lot of support from his family and was deemed okay to live and work on his own a couple of years later. Then, getting the job at the studio and seeing actual celebrities in person basically triggered his past delusions. Looking back, I can remember on a couple of occasions while we were working the audience for a show, he'd become still while seeing a celebrity on stage, with just a huge smile on his face as if he was in another world. He abruptly left the job and I never saw him again. Apparently, he went back to live with his family while they continued to support him. Not sure exactly what happened in the interim, but at some point, he became interested in self-deletion and stole his dad's shotgun. He was in his own apartment while holding the shotgun when his mom came to the door, and in his unstable state, he shot her. The cops showed up, and he fired a few shots at them hoping for a self-deletion by cop scenario, but instead, he gave up. He's now serving time in prison, even though his own family advocated he is admitted to a psych ward. Reading about the trial was incredibly sad. The prosecution grilled his therapist on exactly why they didn't know he was likely to hurt himself or others. They had to say they just didn't see the signs and that they're not mind readers. His father and sister testified that they didn't think he was evil, and this was after he shot their spouse or parent. They really wanted him to be institutionalized. I later read the judge said he didn't think an institution wouldn't be suited to help him, but prison would. This also shocked the local community it took place. It was a small community, and his mom was a teacher for decades there, so nearly everyone knew her.
We had a family friend that I knew. He was more my dad's friend but helped out our family with things. I also knew his stepson since we had been in school since elementary together, though we didn't talk to each other much. About 7 years ago, my dad told me he had some bad news and that a family friend had strangled his wife to death with a cell phone charging cord. After that, I kind of just didn't interact with the guy or the stepson. The stepson was in ranger school at the time and last I knew refused to move back to Iowa as he was worried he might end the man who took his mother's life away. It felt and still kind of feels weird. Edit, I technically knew the victim as well. She was pretty nice and I liked chatting with her and how her son and I acted in elementary. I think that what makes it so weird is knowing both of them.
We knew each other for about 3 years. He was best friends with the guy he ended and robbed selling Christmas trees one year. He was funny, a blast to be around, and never quick to anger. That being said, he did get into heavy substances, but that was after the ending. He wasn't a suspect at that point. We just avoided him, then one day he bragged about it while high and he was arrested. Never saw it coming. That's what scares the crap out of me and my friends, to be honest. Lost a lot of trust in fellow human beings after that.
A childhood acquaintance of mine ended his sister's boyfriend with a wound through the heart in broad daylight on a busy street over an argument about football. Guy was a freaking lunatic even from a very young age. He was constantly breaking into different properties just for the sake of it. He coerced girls of the same age, at around 11 or 12, to engage in oral intercourse. He jerked off all the time, including in the church. He took a dump in the desk drawer of his maths teacher. He'd done prison time for theft before committing the murder and, thanks to the horror of the experience, he ended himself whilst on remand for the attack. He was a broken and vile thing from as young as I can remember.
I have a cousin that had a particularly rough upbringing. Physical abuse and witnessing his mom end his dad with a shotgun out of self-defense levels of rough. He's quite a bit older than me, but the story seems to go that he was an incredibly sweet kid, and just when you'd think things might be okay, he'd go through some kind of tremendous low. He ended up being particularly close with my dad, who taught him to fish, play football, led in Cub Scouts, and tried to provide a sense of security and normalcy in his life. But when seeing your dad take a 12 gauge to the chest was widely considered one of the better aspects of your childhood, there's only so much a well-meaning uncle can do. Everyone seemed to see that he was a kid full of highs and lows, with the lows getting lower and dragging the highs down with them. I doubt the next part of the story sounds unfamiliar to most people. Drugs never help and can land you in jail for a long time, directly or indirectly. When you're in jail for a long time, you're likely to end up in a gang. Once you've got a Black Widow tattoo on your throat and an organized group of people who may hurt you very badly if you stop making bad decisions, you've found yourself in a cycle that's pretty hard to break. And this was about where he was when I was old enough to have real memories of him. My first memory of him was bumping into him at Walmart with my mom, not understanding who he was or why she seemed to hold me so close to her hip, then having a conversation with her in the parking lot about how sometimes you can't be as close to the people you love as you wish you could. My second memory was going with my dad to a halfway house and helping the two of them move furniture. I don't fully understand what we were doing. I was still pretty young then. But somehow, he seemed to break that cycle. Made it through that stint at the halfway house, got a career-type job, and a nice fiancée. He even spent Christmas Eve at our house several years after helping him move furniture. A few months later, he was out to dinner with that sweet fiancée, and she wanted to leave. He didn't. So, he grabbed his steak knife off the table and attacked her in the neck. The witnesses said there was no argument or even raised voices. She died on the scene. The next day at school, a kid asked me if I had heard about that psycho murder that happened. The kid was kind of a prick, so I'm not sure if he knew we were related or if it was a bad coincidence. I just said that I had heard about it. My dad used to go visit occasionally, but I don't think he has for several years. He's never told anyone about some secret motive, and he was confirmed sober at the time. During their last visit, he asked my dad if he believed in demons. I don't know how my dad answered.
My first job out of high school. The guy teaching me the job was a nice enough guy. Good at the job and had high standards. Actually, 25 years later, when I train new people for the industry, I still use some of his lines. He didn't turn up for a shift and wouldn't answer the phone. The boss went to check on him because we were worried it was out of character. His house was all locked up and the dogs were loose. He had been cut out of his elderly grandmother's will for coming out as gay. He was from a very religious, wealthy farming family. He had gone to his grandma's rural house. Blew through her 21 times with a gun he would have had to reload at least once. Wrapped her in plastic and tried to bury her in a dry creek on her property. She was a massive woman. He took her jewelry and cards and went on a joyride halfway across the country and come unstuck using her credit card to get a hotel 2 weeks after her body was found. He seemed normal until he wasn't. He did about 15 years in jail. And actually moved back to the same country town. He works as a storeman at the grocery store.
Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed today's video, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel to see more videos about stories of our lives. Click on one of these videos to watch more and see you soon.